Hi, everyone. Before you get into the directions for the first explore before reading in the class, I wanted to take you through a few definitions that we need to know before we move into the heart of what we're doing here this semester. So, the first of these definitions is the idea of the worldview. The worldview comes from 19th century philosophy. Georg Hegel put into words a definition that had been talked about really for as long ago as the time of Plato. His definition of the worldview was this: your view of your own culture and the culture and ideas of others stems from your experiences. Now, think about that for a minute. What it basically means is that what you think of your own people, Americans, Hispanics, African Americans, Floridians, however you think of yourself, comes from your experiences. Your experiences also influence your views of people from other cultures. For example, if you're an American, that influences how you think about people from Europe or from less developed countries. Now, think about where your worldview comes from for a minute. Okay? It comes from a lot of places. Stop the video for a second and maybe make a list of all the places and all the people and the things that influence your worldview. Now, you might have come up with people like your parents, your teachers, a sports coach from high school, or maybe your friends. You may have even come up with other ideas like school or church or whatever religion you practice, or maybe the fact that you don't practice a religion. Your worldview also comes from where you've lived, and maybe America's not your first home, so that influences you as well. Now, the worldview does have a second part to it. First, we are all influenced by all of the factors around us. We know that. But the second thing is, once that thing influences us, we see everything else in the world that we encounter through the lens of that one influence. We can never go back to that original state of not knowing anything. So think about that as you view some of the works of art in this class, or as we discuss some of the world events we talk about. We have to view them with 21st century eyes because that's what we have. Now, the second term that we need to define for the class is the idea of the humanities. The humanities is the study of the values of a culture in a given time based on what that culture creates. The key words here are values, time, and create. So when we look at how attitudes of women changed from the way they dressed to the fact that they started dating after World War I, for example, think about how those ideas represent a shift in values. When we study Picasso's La Demoiselle d'Avignon, think about how Cubism is representing the idea, the recent release of Einstein's theory of relativity, or how Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase reflects the medium of film, which was new when that painting was created. So think about where humanities comes from. It's all of the different things that represent the creations, but it's studying those creations in a given time and based on what they are. Now, the question of science always comes up. Like I said with Einstein, science is not in and of itself an area of the humanities, but the scientific discoveries and things like that can be. So, the final term to consider is the idea of art. Prior to the 20th century, art actually had a definition. In the 17th century, for example, Louis XIV defined art for most of Europe. Just take a look at the painting on the left. It's Nicolas Poussin's A Dance to the Music of Time from 1634. It has strong and bold lines, bold colors, and almost a mythical subject matter. Well, as time went on, the definition of art evolved. There's always been, up until about the early 20th century, a good set of ideas about what good form in art was. Now, as we move into the 20th century, the idea changes. Take a look at Henri Matisse's Dance from 1909. That's the painting on the right. It's a similar idea, but a very different work of art. In the 20th century and today in the 21st century, our art has no definition, no set style, no right or wrong. You like it, you don't like it, whatever. Now, there are still styles of art, and we will talk about those movements in art, but there was no longer a mandate after about 1900 that came from the government about what art was or what art is. So, whatever you think art is, well, it is. So, what's next here? Now that we have all those definitions out of the way, take a look at the description of the first Explore Before Reading assignment. Remember, we do those before we read for all the modules. Then you'll go in the Readings tab because this week's readings are not in the Fiero book. Let me say that again. They are not in the Fiero book this week. Complete your assignments and discussion, and then you'll be ready to move on with the class.